I think some people think it's the same as the Vegas rule.
Right, they do. This is part of the discussion.
What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Now, the Chatham House rule, as I keep reminding people, is a rule of openness. It was designed back in the 1920s to enable people to share sensitive information with each other, particularly government officials and others with other people, but to get the information out, to keep the public informed. You just must not say who said it or who they work for.
Right.
Protect the identity, but share the information. That's at the heart of the Chatham House rule.
Thank you for clarifying for us. I want to talk a little bit about Brexit. I mean, it was a headline story for the last couple of years, and as we move throughout 2020, it remains front and centre for a lot of investors. What happens from here as Sajid Javid is again putting the hard Brexit scenario back on the table for some investors? Effectively, there won't be alignments on goods and services with Europe once there is an exit. What do you make of the commentary so far?
Well, number one, I think there's some political posturing. It's going to be very intense and very short negotiation if we're going to meet the deadline of having a first outline deal done by the end of calendar year 2020. So the government needs to put down a firm line that it is not going to suddenly bring all sorts of EU rules in by the back door and undermine its credibility as a tough negotiator.
But if we were reverse, going right back to the have cake and eat it moment where we want to be close to Europe, but we don't want any of the rules or anything else that comes with it.
The one thing we've learned from Boris Johnson is he can talk tough, but when he needs to compromise, he compromises. After he became leader, the withdrawal deal, he accepted a border down the Irish Sea, which Theresa May had never considered accepting. Ended up paying the 30+ billion in the deal, which money he said should never be paid. In the end, he's accepted a kind of vassal status for a year where we're going to have to follow in the UK EU laws without being a member of the EU. So I think tough talk at the beginning. He can do compromises towards the end with an 80-seat majority. Now, what are the compromises on? When people talk about regulatory alignment, I think whatever export services, goods go into the EU are going to have to follow EU laws. If you want to go in and sell something into the EU market, like every other country in the world, the UK will have to sell into that market under the EU rules. What they don't want to do, though, is to find those rules penetrating back into the UK on environmental legislation, on taxation, on workers' rights, and especially on state aid and competition rules, where the EU is worried that a UK-based company, even if it follows the EU rules as it exports in, is starting from a stronger position. And that's where the tough line is, because if you can't decide your own state aid, if you can't decide your own competition rules, what's the point of being sovereign?
And the UK is going to be trying to ink these trade deals while we have a fairly uncertain environment still around trade. We might have a phase 1 trade deal between the US and China, but phase 2 will begin, and there's still some issues with Europe versus the United States, even though digital taxes, a truce has been declared until year end. What do you make of the trade environment and the headline risk to investors and to CEOs looking to park their money somewhere on growth strategies in 2020?
I think for the next, well, certainly if Donald Trump wins, but even if Donald Trump doesn't win the presidential election, we're in a phase where you cannot rely on the multilateral trading system to act as wind in your sails for any corporate CEO or any business. We've moved, I think, globalization has stalled at 1.0, if you want to call it. What we've got to do is make sure it doesn't go backwards. And the truces signed between the US and China, it looks like a truce on the digital sales tax for the EU and the US. Those are ways of saying we're not going to let things get worse, but they certainly don't mean progress. So I think most companies need to start thinking about regionalization, balkanization of global trade, different rules on technology, competition being used on state aid, perhaps tariffs being used, as Donald Trump has done, on a political basis. That's the new world. More operating close to your markets and less reliance on global supply chains.
Just quickly, I wonder whether the timing is in what we've already had. Phase 1 gets done, and obviously in an election year, this digital tax issue, let's kick it out past the presidential election. Does that tell us that Trump does not want to be having trade fights as he's going back to voters? He wants to have these wins.
Absolutely. I mean, my sense is that what he wanted to do was, for his first 3 or 4 years, show he's tough. He can go back and say, I've done a deal with the Chinese. I've done a new NAFTA. So we no longer have NAFTA. I've done USMCA. I've got those Europeans, pulling back, and I've got them to spend more on defence. He wants a nice line of stories that each of the things he undertook, he made some progress on. He doesn't need a big deal because most of his voters won't know the difference between the deal he could have had and the kind of ones he's delivering.
Hi, I'm Joanna Bersecci, and thank you for watching. You can check out more of our videos by clicking on the boxes on the screen. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more from CNBC International. Thank you for watching.